So today I'm going to talk about my top 10 works of historical fiction. Historical fiction has become my second favorite genre after the fantasy genre, literally because of the first book on this list. Not the first I talk about, but the number one book on this list, one of the most universally praised books I've ever read. However, when I talk about historical fiction and I hear people talk about historical fiction, for me, the most important aspect is the setting. So of all these 10, I will give you the setting because I think that often plays into my enjoyment of historical fiction novels as well as whether I don't enjoy them. And that may be the same for you. So with all of these, I'll give you just a brief description, what I love about it, but I'll also include the setting. So here we go, my top 10 works of historical fiction. Number 10, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. A landmark of American literature, The Grapes of Wrath was published in 1939, and while not a work of historical fiction at the time, it certainly is today. The setting is a post-Great Depression America set in the Dust Bowl, as we follow a family trying to escape poverty in Oklahoma by making their way to California. It is a novel that defined a bleak era in American history. The Grapes of Wrath is an exploration of power, both those who have it and those who don't. It's a story of perseverance through hardships. It follows Steinbeck's everyman types of characters, which he draws so well. It's a snapshot of 1930s America, a tale of exploration, but above all, a tale of humanity. Number 9, The Terror by Dan Simmons. The Terror is not a traditional work of historical fiction, but is rather a work of historical fiction with a supernatural element. In The Terror, we revisit one of my favorite historical mysteries, that of the Franklin expedition, which left England in 1845 to find the Northwest Passage and disappeared. Simmons' gripping tale introduces a fantastical element with a horror element, even more horrific than the cold, icy conditions that the expedition attempts to traverse. If I had one wish that I could force an author to write something, I would want Dan Simmons to write a whole book series like this, taking an historical mystery and just adding his own solution. In the case of The Terror and the Erebus, the two ships that were lost in the ice, there's a supernatural and horrific element thrown in there. So this is not a traditional work of historical fiction, but it is mostly a work of historical fiction. People who've read Dan Simmons, he's written in so many different genres, science fiction, literary fiction, horror. Most of them, well, I can't say most, but a lot of them consider The Terror his finest work. Number 8, Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Gone with the Wind is another classic work of American literature. The book is set in Georgia during the American Civil War and afterwards, dealing with the era known as Reconstruction. It is a sprawling epic tale that received the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1937. I'll be honest, I did not want to love Gone with the Wind, because at the heart of Gone with the Wind, it's a huge romance in the middle, and that's not something that I look for in a book or I gravitate to in a book. However, it's so well done, this book, this hardship. It taught me about a different perspective of Reconstruction. Scarlett's Tale is one of those epic immersive tales where you will feel her hardships and setbacks. And this book, more than anything else I've read, really conveyed what the South was like post-Civil War. Number 7, The Accursed Kings by Maurice Druyon. The Accursed Kings is a 7-book series by Maurice Druyon published between 1955 and 1977, and was called by George R.R. Martin the original Game of Thrones. Why? The setting is in France prior to the 100 Years' War and deals with court intrigue at a level I've never read in this genre. So I have to give you an odd bit of advice for The Accursed Kings. It's a 7-book series, but I only want you to read the first 6 books. Druyon wrote the first 6 books rather quickly, and then 2 decades later he wrote the 7th book. It adds nothing. In fact, I think it detracts from a beautiful ending to the 6th book that had me in tears. This is court intrigue, political intrigue. You have colorful characters, you have backstabbing characters, you have the rich class trying to keep power, people trying to take power. It is incredible. But don't read that last book. The Accursed Kings is a work of historical fiction that I think is often underappreciated and needs more people to read it. Number 6, The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. The Name of the Rose is a murder mystery set in an Italian abbey in 1327. Published in 1980, it has become one of the best-selling novels of all time. It is a gripping mystery as we follow William of Baskerville, a Franciscan friar, attempt to solve a string of murders at the Abbey. So, the setting hooked me. A murder mystery set in an Italian abbey? At that time, I was hooked right away. But even if the setting doesn't hook you, this is not a traditional murder mystery. In many ways, this is a very postmodern novel that goes very differently than you would expect. And again, this will be the second time, but I'll probably say it like 5 more times. I felt so immersed in the setting. And that's one of the things I love about the talented authors of historical fiction is they put you in the setting and you feel like you're there. Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco is one not to skip. Number 5, The Killer Angels by Michael Shera. The Killer Angels by Michael Shera is set during the Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War. Following both sides of this pivotal battle and employing a variety of point-of-view characters, Shera brings the action to life like few authors have done in this genre. The Killer Angels won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1975. The ability of Shera to bring this battle to life cannot be understated. When Joshua Chamberlain yells, "Fix bayonets!" and charges the Confederates on top of the Battle of Little Round Top, you'll feel like you're there. When you're following James Longstreet of the Confederacy as a point-of-view character, watching him witness Robert E. Lee make tactical error after tactical error, but because of his love for the man, he doesn't intervene, you're going to feel that. This is a work that rightly won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and in many ways is one of the best historical novels ever written. Number 4, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Set in the 1870s America, Lonesome Dove follows 2 former Texas Rangers, Gus McCrae and Woodrow Call, embarking upon a journey to run cattle to Montana. A sprawling epic in every sense of the imagination, Lonesome Dove follows this epic journey with a large cast of memorable characters who encounter obstacles and hardships on a scale rarely seen in fiction. This is another book that won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. When I first read Lonesome Dove in January of this year, I was a little nervous because the hype around this book, the praise for this book is near universal. So many people call this their favorite book of all time, their favorite historical novel of all time, the one Western you should read, and I hoped that it would live up to the hype, and it absolutely did. Gus and Call are just etched into my memory. As long as I read Westerns, I don't know if I'll encounter 2 more colorful characters that I truly enjoy just following this epic sprawling journey. So when you hear the hype around Lonesome Dove, it's not hype, it's real, it's fantastic. Number 3, Shogun by James Clavell. A literary phenomenon when released in 1975, Shogun was a work of literature singularly responsible for the West's renewed interest in Japan at the time. Set in feudal Japan in 1600, Shogun follows an English pilot, a sailor, who is shipwrecked on the coast of Japan and ends up caught in a political and personal intrigue while navigating this foreign landscape. This story is remarkable, and there's a reason why Shogun is such a well-regarded work by readers decades after its release. There's so much I love about Shogun. The setting itself is remarkable. Japan during the time of the samurai, and seeing Japan through the eyes of this European was highly riveting. But what I loved most about Shogun was the cross-cultural learning that all of the characters have. You see both sides of this, the Japanese and the Europeans, thinking of one another as barbarians at the beginning of this book. But as they get to learn from one another and learn about each other, they start to see each side a little less barbaric, a little more human. And it causes them to think themselves about their own culture and aspects of their culture that might possibly be deemed barbaric. It's one of my favorite works that I've read since I started this channel, and I do have a review with light spoilers that I'll link in the description below if you want to hear me just gush about a book that I love. Number 3 on my works of historical fiction, and probably a top 10 book of all time for me, Shogun by James Clavell. Number 2, The Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. The Warlord Chronicles is a trilogy of historical fiction with a different kind of premise. Bernard Cornwell asked himself the question, what if King Arthur had lived? What would the real story have been like to give rise to the fantastical legend that we know today? What follows is an extremely inventive take on the King Arthur legend from one of the masters of the action-adventure side of historical fiction. Arthur, Merlin, Guinevere, Lancelot, we know all those characters. but Cornwell presents them quite differently. And the real version of these characters, as told by Cornwell, you can see exactly how they became the legends that they became. Additionally, he takes some of the magical elements like the sword and the stone and has a plausible explanation about how it happened and how it became this magical thing. It's one of the most inventive things I have read in my lifetime. In addition to being on this list, it was also in my top 10 works, my top 10 book series that I ever read. So I'll link that in the description below. But if you're interested in this setting and seeing just one of the best writers of action adventure in historical fiction give his slant on the King Arthur tale, check it out. You'll encounter Arthur the man, not the king. Number 1, Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett is set in 12th century England and is set in the fictitious village of Kingsbridge and deals with the building of a grand cathedral. Pillars of the Earth is an epic, a thriller, and an historical novel all wrapped into one. Follett makes the Middle Ages setting come alive, and you'll find yourself engrossed in the small village of Kingsbridge and its inhabitants over the span of the decades that it takes to build this grand cathedral. If for some reason I could only recommend one book to anybody for the rest of my life, it would be Pillars of the Earth. This book is one of the most universally praised and loved books that I've read. It's one of those books that anybody that I talk to that's read it, most of them, even if they only appreciate it, they at least appreciate it, if not love it, if not call it their favorite book of all time. And it's certainly one of mine. As I was reading Pillars, I distinctly remember getting about 150 pages from the end of the book and starting to feeling a bit melancholy. And it had nothing to do with the story. I was melancholy because I knew the book was going to end. Because even though this is a 900-page epic, I did not want this book to end because it was just perfectly plotted, perfectly told. It's a story that is etched into my brain, and I can't wait to reread it at some point in the future. My favorite work of historical fiction, Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. Okay, well, those are my 10 favorite works of historical fiction. 2 things I'd love to hear from you. 1, I'd love to hear what your favorite works in historical fiction are. But also, now that you know kind of my taste, do you have any recommendations for me? I love getting recommendations from all of you, so I would love to hear your recommendations in the comments below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.